Okay, so first I want to congratulate Matthias with the new unit here in Bonn. It's really great to be here at the inaugural conference, so thanks a lot. Okay, so my plan is to present the paper that we are working on that looks at what is a morally relevant choice. And of course, choices are really intrinsic to economics, so I think this is an extremely important question to think about. And I will report from a very simple experimental study that I think comes with very powerful results. So basically, the background for our study is that we know that this idea that people should be held more personally responsible for their choices is really a fundamental moral idea in the Western world. So we heard Schule talk about it, but we know that this applies broadly to almost every country we go, this idea that, well, you make choices and you should be held responsible for the consequences, at least to some extent. And clearly this is extremely important because we make so many important choices in our lives as adolescents, as adults, when it comes to education. I mean, what kind of education to pursue, what kind of occupation to take, what kind of lifestyle to live, whether you choose to live a healthy lifestyle or not, and also in terms of financial decisions. And just to give you an illustration of the importance of this, I will pick three domains where this really comes to the forefront. So one is the redistribution debate, where, for example, in the US, people argue that now there is like more or less a personal responsibility crusade, where people really use this idea of, well, you have to take responsibility for your own situation to push for certain policies. So, for example, the reduction in transfers to single parents and families with non-employment members, Moffitt has argued that it is really rooted in this idea that, well, these people should take responsibility for their own situation. The same you see in the enormous discussions we have now about how to organize and how to think about pension systems in all Western countries. This idea that people need to be held personally responsible for these things really is at the forefront. And maybe, I mean, most prominently, you see this in the health debate. So if there are two words that really matter for people in the health community when they discuss health policy issues, these are the words of personal responsibility. And these are really at the core of a discussion of, well, who should pay for lifestyle diseases, for example? Should people be held personally responsible, or is this beyond what they really can control? And there is, an experimental literature where we have contributed, which shows that, well, people in general really pay importance to personal responsibility in the sense that it really matters whether the source of an inequality reflects that people have made different choices, people have exerted different levels of effort, and so on. The question in this paper is really a question, well, do we sometimes assign too much importance to personal responsibility? And it's not a trivial question to answer because it's a little bit hard to say what does it mean? What does it mean that you assign too much responsibility? And this is where we try to make a contribution. And basically, the starting point for this paper is that we go to the philosophers and say, well, what do they think about this? What are the morally relevant choices that people should be held personally responsible for, at least to some extent? And there is a huge discussion in the philosophical literature, of course, but there are two conditions that, in some sense, I think very many philosophers agree about. And one is that one is that people should not be held responsible for outcomes of a choice if the person could not have changed the likelihood of outcome by choosing differently. So the trivial example that we will work with is if you have a choice set of two identical alternatives. You make a choice of one or the other, but it doesn't change anything. Should this at all change the responsibility you have for the outcome that follows later? The other one is that people should not be held personally responsible if the person could only have avoided the outcome at unreasonably large costs. Of course, there is a big question about what that means exactly, and I'll come back to that in the design of the experiment. But the basic idea is if I go to Matthias and put the gun to his head and say, give me your money, well, so he has a choice, right? He can give me my money or he can sacrifice his life. If he gives me his money, does that make him personally responsible for this choice? So the approach we take in this paper, we really want to to study, is it really the case that people attach too much importance to choices? And basically, we use a spectator design where we put people in a redistributed situation, and I will go into the details of that. And then we basically look at whether they hold others responsible for choices that violate these two minimal conditions. So the first condition, which I will refer to as the nominal choice condition, is that, well, people have just only made choices in settings where there are two identical alternatives. And does that matter at all for people? And the other is the forced choice condition, where we make one alternative in the choice set really, really bad relative to the other, such that everyone basically chooses the other. And now we ask again, well, do people hold others responsible for making that choice when it can only be avoided by taking a really bad alternative? So we do this with two studies. So first we do a lab experiment. So I would basically introduce the idea through the lab experiment. And then we replicated everything and did a lot of extension with a large online experiment with a representative population, where we also added a lot of treatments to study mechanisms. So the experiment is super easy. Basically, it has three phases. First, there's a work phase, where people work. Then there is an earning phase, and then there is a distribution phase. And after that, they answer some questions. I will come back to some of this in this presentation. And the experiment, the core treatments in the experiment is that we have a base treatment that I will explain in detail. And then we have two treatments where we introduce a nominal choice and a forced choice. And the lab experiment was done at our school with about 400 students. It's between individual design. We paid them quite a bit of money. So, I mean, this is Norway, so that explains the numbers. Okay, so in the work phase, they basically were given the task of working on a real effort task for 30 minutes. So they were given 5 words like, is salty sky the blue? And were asked to put these 5 words together to become a coherent sentence. And they were just asked, well, please work on this continuously for 30 minutes. And there was no production requirement. They were only asked to work continuously. And they were not informed that they would be paid for this. They only knew that they would get the show-up fee, and later we then told them how they were paid. Then in the earnings phase, the participants were informed that they would be paid for the work they had done, and that their earnings would be determined by a lottery. So here is what we told them. Your payment will be determined by a lottery, in which you with equal probability earn either 800 kroner or nothing. Or in the lottery, there will be a ball randomly drawn from an urn containing an equal number of yellow and green balls. So if a yellow ball is drawn, you earn 800. If a green ball is drawn, you earn nothing. And importantly, this what's really critical here is that they make no choices in the earnings phase. So in the baseline, they do no choices. They just work, and then they face this lottery as payment for the work. And then they were told that there would be a distribution phase and that they would get more information about that later. So in the base treatment, in the distribution phase, 2 participants, a winner and a loser from the lottery, were paired. And then we used a spectator design where a third party now is asked whether he wants to redistribute some of the earnings from the winner, who has 800, to the loser. And the spectator took part in the same treatment, but had no information about his own earnings before he made the choice. So basically, the idea with the base treatment is a setting of brute luck. I mean, they've been working. One is just unlucky and doesn't get any earnings from the work. The other gets 800. And the question now is, will the spectator do anything to eliminate this inequality due to brute luck? And our expectations, based on what we have done before, was that, I mean, a lot of people will find this completely unfair and equalize. So the really important thing is that we then introduce 2 additional treatments. The nominal choice treatment, where we introduce a nominal choice in the earnings phase. So then, I mean, the workers make a nominal choice. I will explain it in detail. And in the forced choice treatment, we introduce what we call a forced choice in the earnings phase. And the basic question we have is, do these choices change people's inequality acceptance, the spectators' inequality acceptance? So in the nominal choice treatment, I mean, they work, and then they come to the earnings phase, And then they're told that, well, your earnings will be determined by lottery, but then we ask them first to choose between two identical lotteries. So we will now ask you to choose between two colors, yellow and green. Your choice will determine the outcome of a lottery in which you with equal probability earn either 800 or nothing. In the lottery, a ball will be randomly drawn from an urn containing an equal number of yellow and green balls. If you choose the color of the ball that is drawn, you earn 800, otherwise you earn nothing. So the yellow and green balls are identical choices in the choice set of the worker. And just for the record, I mean, there are no colored bias in our population. So 69 chose the yellow ball, 71 chose the green ball in this treatment. In the fourth choice treatment, we say to them, well, after they have done the work, that, well, now you can choose your payment scheme. You can either have this lottery, where you get 50-50, 0, 800, or you can take 25. And 25 is really, really bad if you think about it compared to the probability of winning the expected value of 400, which is then 16 times higher. Almost everyone chose the lottery. There were 4 people that didn't do it, so you can keep that in mind for the interpretation of the findings. So basically our question now is, in all treatments, the spectators face an earnings distribution of 0, one guy, 800, the other guy for the work they've done. Does the spectator want to do anything about it? That is the question. In all treatments, I will claim there's just brute luck that has really caused this inequality, even though they made choices in the nominal choice and the forced choice treatment. So basically, I mean, there are lots of details in the paper, but big picture, we look at now what is the level of inequality that is implemented by the spectators. So we just measure that by the difference in absolute difference between the earnings that the spectator decides to give to the two workers divided by total income. So this is basically, or this is the Gini in this setting. And now the question is, well, do we see any difference in inequality, level of inequality implemented? And if people were satisfying these two conditions, we shouldn't. But what we do is we see huge differences. So here is the base treatment. So if you look at this one first, forget about that one. This is how much inequality they implement in the base treatment, where it's just like brute luck. And it's a Gini of 0.2. Introducing a nominal choice, a purely nominal choice, or a forced choice, dramatically increases inequality acceptance. So in the forced choice treatment, they go to 0.33 or something, and in the nominal choice, it goes to 0.4. Here you see it where we just focus on one part of the distribution, namely how many give nothing to the worse off. And again, you see, in the base treatment, there are very few people who let the worker go leave this experiment with very little, no, with nothing. But this increases again dramatically by introducing a nominal or forced choice. So the main message from this first part is that spectators' willingness to accept inequality dramatically depends on whether there has been a nominal or forced choice involved in the earnings treatment. Okay, so there are many questions to this. If you are thinking about it. So that's why we did the second part, and I will talk now about the second part. So the first question is, well, is this just like a student kind of thing, right? Is it something we get in student samples which would disappear in larger, if you go to representative samples? I motivated this by society at large, so it would be interesting to see whether this also generalizes to a representative sample. Then you can think about several parts of the experimental design that you're wondering, well, does that really create the result? So we had non-involved spectators, so the spectators were also workers, as you heard, so it would be interesting to see, well, make the spectators totally independent. Let's really have spectators that have not at all been part of the experiment and see whether things go away. This work phase, does that really matter? Is that really what's driving the choice effect? And you may also say, well, 25, it's a very low payment in the forced choice, but it's not strictly dominated by the lottery. So can you increase this even further and even make it strictly dominated by the lottery, and will things change then? And of course, another extremely important question is what is the mechanism here? Is it that the spectators have a cognitive bias, that they have some kind of illusion of control? Or is this more a fundamental moral preference that people feel that, well, they have made a choice, and then, I mean, partly they have to bear the consequences of it, even if the choice is nominal or forced. So what we did was that we did a large-scale study with a representative population in Norway. So we had almost 6,000 spectators recruited that then made decisions for workers that we recruited from the MTurk. So basically what I'm interested in is the spectators. The workers I have in order to create real situations for the spectators to decide. And each spectator now makes a choice for one pair of MTurkers. So again, I mean, the setting is exactly the same. The MTurkers come into the lab, they have earnings, and then there's a spectator, totally independent, that makes a decision of whether to redistribute. We first decided to replicate the lab experiment, so we did exactly the same 3 treatments. Then we did 3 corresponding treatments where we took away the work part. So we just said, well, they just come in and we go straight to the earnings phase. And then we had 2 additional treatments where we had what we called strong forced choice and very strong forced choice, where we made this alternative in the forced choice setting, the bad alternative, even worse. What do we find? So I think this is really striking. We find exactly the same effect in a general representative sample, and it's still huge. So if you look at the left part first, the left upper part is with work. So this is basically replication of the lab experiment. You see that the effects are huge. I mean, they are implementing less inequality in the baseline treatment, but the effects of introducing a forced choice or a nominal choice is huge on inequality acceptance. What happens if there's no work? Well, now they are willing to implement more inequality, which makes sense. I mean, work creates some kind of entitlement, right? So you become a little bit more hesitant to redistribute, but you see, again, exactly the same patterns. In the base treatment, where there's no choice, you implement inequality like 0.2 Gini, increases dramatically when there is a nominal forced choice. And again, you see this also when it comes to nothing to worse off, that, well, the share of people giving nothing to worse, the one who has nothing initially, increases dramatically both in the forced choice and nominal choice setting. What happens in the 2 treatments I don't show, where we make this bad alternative in the forced choice setting even worse? Well, we get exactly the same finding. It doesn't matter. So basically, all the forced choice treatments give exactly the same finding. How bad this alternative is not, doesn't seem to be important. So what can we say about mechanisms? So first, I mean, does the choice effect reflect the cognitive bias? So we know there's a huge literature in psychology saying that there's this illusion of control. People have this feeling that they can control stuff they clearly can't control. So the first question was, well, is this what is going on, that spectators have this illusion of control on behalf of others? So in the representative sample, we asked people, to what extent do you feel that the workers had control over their earnings before you decide the redistribution part? And what we see is that 80% says in the brute-like treatment, no, I mean, there's absolutely no control, which makes complete sense. And they say the same in nominal choice treatment. And, and this number goes a little bit down in the forced choice treatment. But it has no effect at all if you do mediation analysis or whatever. This is not at all driving the results. I mean, you can put this into regressions, nothing changes with the estimated treatment effects. So basically, this is not about the illusion of control. It's not that they have the illusion of control. What about fundamental attribution error? So this is the idea that, I mean, you exaggerate, I mean, the intrinsic characteristics of an individual, and when you look at, I mean, the causes of a certain event, and downplay the external environment's importance. So in this setting, to go a little bit more specific to that mechanism, we asked people, well, do you believe that some people have a particular talent for picking the right color in this kind of setting? And again, 80-something said, no, absolutely not. Some people didn't know, and some few people said, yeah, I believe that. But we don't see that at all, I mean, correlates with how they behave in this treatment. So it does, I mean, so some people have this weird ideas, but it does not seem to be that this is driving the effect. Could it be like intuitive reasoning, this kind of system one thing that you just, you quickly, act on something using a heuristic of, choice being important in general, and then, just using that heuristic in this setting where it doesn't seem that it should matter. So we did a cognitive reflection test. We did this both in the lab experiment, in the online experiment, and then we can interact that with treatments. Absolutely not what's going on. So actually what we see is that if there is anyone, so actually we see a slight effect in the opposite direction. This choice effect is even stronger for people who do well on the CRT test. When you look at the spectator background, it's not at all driven by people with low education, low income, or anything like that. So basically, we think that this is some kind of fundamental preference we have, which we may challenge, but we have it. It's a little bit like the trolley problem. You realize there is a problem, but you still have it. And when you look at the justification of the spectator choices, we really see that when they justify what they did, their choice, they really refer to the fact that, well, these guys made choices. So this is really the justification they come up with. Okay, so that's basically what I wanted to share with you. I think it's tremendously important because this idea of personal responsibility is so important. And I will argue that, what we show with this experiment is that we have some demanding or weird ideas about personal responsibility that we should discuss more and that we should potentially challenge. There are two ways of looking at the results. One is more methodological, that we have really nailed down one way of really identifying that people sometimes do the wrong thing when it comes to personal responsibility. The other one is more empirical, to say that, well, actually, there are lots of situations that are like this. And lots of situations where people do make forced choices when they decide to work in a sweatshop. Lots of cases where people make nominal choices. What does a kid know when he's 15 about the labor market 15 years later? What do we know about pension funds? So that's empirical, say, well, actually, there are many choices like this, so we have to keep it in mind. Anyway, we take from this, but this is the interpretation part, so I'm happy to be challenged on that. Our research suggests that the moral idea of personal responsibility is given too much weight in society. Thank you.